The indigenous peoples of America survived in very dangerous conditions. None of us would have lasted even a couple of weeks. But how did they do it? Their homes not only withstood the forces of nature that would have destroyed modern buildings, but also became islands of warmth and comfort. Inside by the fire, life went on while outside the apocalypse raged. This is not a story of survival at the limits of human endurance, but of ingenious engineering honed over centuries. It is about a deep understanding of the laws of nature, which allowed them to turn the blizzard itself into their ally. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how the simple design of the teepee used the fury of the winter wind to heat the dwelling, and what secret element turned it into the perfect climate control system. What if I told you that a teepee is not just a tent, but a living, breathing organism? We are used to thinking of a house as a static box that passively protects us from the elements. But the philosophy of Native Americans was completely different. Their dwelling was an active partner that interacted with the wind, snow, and cold. The Tipi did not fight the elements, but used their energy to its advantage. Its design was a dynamic system capable of adapting to the slightest changes outside. It was not a barrier between man and nature, but rather a membrane that allowed them to coexist harmoniously. The key element of this system was breathing. Air constantly circulated through specially placed openings at the top and bottom of the teepee. This process, similar to the work of the lungs, provided draft for the fire and removed smoke. Outside, the wind intensified this draft, helping the teepee to breathe more deeply and efficiently. Thus, the stronger the blizzard raged, the better the internal hearth worked. The dwelling did not simply resist the storm, it entered into symbiosis with it. It was a holistic ecosystem where each element played its role. The poles were the skeleton, the covering was the skin, and the internal hearth was the heart. Together, they formed a single organism living in rhythm with the surrounding world. This perception of home changes everything. It is not just a set of materials, but a continuation of a philosophy of life, where there is no place for fighting nature. There is only an understanding of its laws and the ability to follow them. That is why the teepee was so effective. Its strength lay not in the thickness of its walls, but in the flexibility and intelligence of its design. It was a dwelling designed not by engineers, but by generations of wise men. They understood that true protection is not a blind defense, but intelligent adaptation. The teepee did not try to stop the wind. It directed its currents. It did not try to defeat the cold. It turned it into its helper. This concept of a living house is one of the most profound and underappreciated achievements of indigenous culture. It demonstrates a level of harmony with the world that we have almost lost today. Modern technology isolates us, while the teepee taught us to cooperate. Do you think modern houses can be called living in the same sense as teepees? Share your opinion in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about why a simple conical shape turned out to be more ingenious than the most complex architectural solutions? At first glance, a cone seems too primitive, but behind this simplicity lies a perfect understanding of aerodynamics and the laws of physics. When hurricane-force winds hit the camp, they did not encounter a flat wall. Instead, air currents flowed smoothly around the sloping walls of the teepee on all sides. This minimized wind pressure and the sail effect of the structure. Any square structure would have created turbulence and experienced enormous loads. The cone, on the other hand, allowed the wind to slide over its surface without causing damage. That is why the teepee could withstand conditions where other shelters would have been torn to shreds. This same shape worked perfectly during heavy snowfalls. On a flat or sloping roof, tons of snow would accumulate, threatening to collapse the structure. But the steep slopes of the teepee gave the snow no chance to stick. The snow simply slid down under its own weight, accumulating at the base of the dwelling. This was not just convenient, it was ingenious. The snowdrifts at the base created an additional insulating layer, protecting the lower part of the teepee from the piercing wind. Thus, the more snow fell, the warmer the shelter became. The element that was supposed to destroy instead strengthened and insulated the dwelling. This was another example of how the design of the teepee turned a threat into an advantage. The entire structure was based on long poles tied together at the top. This system was not rigid. It had a certain flexibility. Under gusts of wind, the poles could bend slightly, absorbing the load, and then return to their original position. Most tipis were not perfect cones. They were slightly tilted backward. This made the rear, steeper wall even more resistant to prevailing winds. And the front, more sloping part created additional space above the entrance and hearth. Every detail of this shape was the result of centuries of observation and experimentation. Nothing was accidental or superfluous. It was a triumph of functionality over decorativeness, pure engineering of nature. It was this perfect shape that was the first and foremost secret to survival in the harsh winter conditions. It ensured structural integrity and turned the fury of the elements into passive protection. The Tipi resembled a rock in the middle of a raging ocean, but the ideal form was only half the success. Ready to find out what secret inner layer turned the Tipi from a simple shelter into a cozy home, even when a blizzard raged outside? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Native American dwellings, one that is not written about in textbooks. Most people think that a teepee is just skins stretched over a frame, but this is a gross misconception that ignores a key element of the entire system: the inner screen lining. This screen, known to the Lakota as ozan, was a wide strip of treated skins or canvas. It was attached to poles at human height. It ran along the entire inner perimeter of the dwelling, not reaching the top or the floor. At first glance, it may seem like a simple decoration or protection from dripping water, but in fact, the ozan was the heart of the teepee's climate control system. It performed several critical functions at once, transforming the shelter into a comfortable space. First, it created an air gap between the outer wall and the interior living space. Cold air that seeped under the outer edge of the covering did not reach the people inside. Instead, it rushed upward through this gap between the two layers of skins. This flow of cold air, rising to the top of the teepee, created a powerful draft for the hearth. It literally pushed the smoke out through the smoke vents. As a result, it was possible to sit by an open fire inside the teepee without the risk of suffocating from the smoke. It was an ingenious chimney effect built into the very structure of the dwelling. The smoke did not mix with the air in the room, but rose straight up. The ozone created an invisible wall separating the flows of clean and smoky air. Secondly, the inner screen served as an excellent insulator. The air gap between the two layers of skins significantly reduced heat loss. It worked on the same principle as modern double-glazed windows. In addition, the smooth inner surface of the screen reflected heat from the fire back into the living space. This created a feeling of comfort and even heat. People were warmed not only by the direct radiation of the fire, but also by the reflected heat from all sides. Ozone also solved the problem of condensation. In any dwelling in cold weather, moisture from people's breath condenses on cold walls. In the teepee, all the moisture settled on the outer shell and then flowed down it without getting inside thanks to the inner screen. Thus, this seemingly simple element was a real technological breakthrough. It provided ventilation, insulation, heat reflection, and humidity control. Without the ozone, life in a teepee in winter would have been impossible. What I am about to show you will completely change your perception of campfires. At the center of each teepee was a hearth, a source of heat, light, and life. But it was not just a campfire, but a carefully designed and controlled system that obeyed its own laws. Unlike the large, bright fires we are used to seeing, the hearth in a teepee was surprisingly small. It was usually dug out as a shallow pit no more than half a meter in diameter. Size was crucial to efficiency. A small hearth required much less firewood. In winter conditions, when fuel was a precious resource, this was critically important. Every branch was used to its maximum benefit. The design of the fire was also special. The wood was often stacked vertically in the form of a small hut. This type of flame burned evenly, produced less smoke, and allowed the intensity of the fire to be easily regulated by adding logs one at a time. The location of the hearth in the very center was ideal from a thermal engineering point of view. The heat from the fire spread evenly in all directions, heating the entire interior space. There were no cold corners or overheated areas. The main control element of this system was the smoke valves. Two wings at the top of the teepee. Long poles were tied to their ends, reaching down to the ground. These poles were used to regulate the smoke opening. The inhabitants of the teepee constantly controlled these valves, just as a captain controls the sails. They could be turned depending on the direction of the wind to create optimal draft. In calm weather, they were open wider, and in a hurricane, they were almost completely closed on the windward side. But how do you keep the fire going when all the firewood is covered with snow? In the next chapter, you will learn about ingenious methods of fuel harvesting that made it possible to survive any winter. Winter survival on the plains was a strategic task, and fuel harvesting played a key role in it. Preparations for the cold weather began long before the first snowfall. Autumn was a time of intensive firewood gathering. Families gathered any dry wood they could find. Preference was given to hardwoods such as poplar or willow, which grew along rivers. These woods burned slowly and gave off a lot of heat. The collected firewood was not left outside. It was brought inside the teepee and neatly stacked around the perimeter. The firewood was stored in the space between the outer covering and the inner screen, where it remained dry and was always at hand. This fuel supply was a vital insurance policy. When a blizzard swept through the area for several days, the family could keep the fire going without going outside. This ensured complete autonomy during the storm. But trees were rare in the vast expanses of the Great Plains. Therefore, the main and most reliable source of fuel was dried bison dung. It was the real gold of the plains, without which life in winter would have been impossible. During the summer and fall, women gathered this valuable resource. Dried in the sun, it became hard and light. It burned very slowly with almost no smoke and gave off an even, strong heat, ideal for heating a teepee. Supplies of this fuel were also stored inside or near the dwelling, protected from the snow. Its efficiency was so high that many travelers of the time noted its advantage over firewood. It produced less soot and did not spark. Rational use of fuel was the basis of everything. The fire never burned unnecessarily. At night, it was reduced to smoldering coals, which maintained the heat until morning and allowed the flame to be quickly rekindled with the first rays of the sun. People understood the value of every log and every cake of bread. It was not just fuel, but concentrated energy from the sun and the earth. They treated it with respect and care. Thus, the fuel problem was solved through foresight, planning, and the use of all available resources. The inhabitants of the plains did not wait for winter to take them by surprise. They prepared for it in advance, creating reserves that guaranteed warmth and life. What if I told you that the main secret of the teepee's stability was not in the poles, but underground? Even the most aerodynamic shape would be useless if the dwelling were not securely anchored to the ground. Indigenous peoples developed a simple but extremely effective anchoring system. The bottom edge of the skin covering did not simply lie on the ground. Loops were made around its entire perimeter, through which wooden stakes were driven into the ground. These stakes held the covering firmly in place, giving the wind no chance to get under it. The stakes were driven in at an angle, which significantly increased their holding power. It was very difficult to pull out such a stake. As a result, the covering was tightly stretched and pressed firmly to the ground, forming a sealed connection. If the ground was too frozen or rocky for stakes, another method was used. Large, heavy stones were placed around the perimeter of the teepee. Their weight pressed the edge of the covering to the ground, performing the same function as the stakes. This fastening system was flexible and adaptable to any conditions. Long stakes were used on soft soil and stones on hard soil. The main principle remained the same. Do not leave a single gap at the bottom for the wind to get in. But the most ingenious technique was to use the elements themselves to strengthen the dwelling. As soon as it began to snow, people went outside and began to shovel snow onto the base of the teepee. A thick snowbank grew up around the dwelling. This wall not only served as an additional anchor, but was also an excellent insulator. It completely blocked any drafts that could seep under the roof. The stronger the blizzard, the higher and stronger this protective barrier became. Snow, which for many was a symbol of danger, became a building material here. It sealed the dwelling from below, making it completely windproof. This was another example of how a threat was turned into an advantage. Inside the dwelling, this created a feeling of complete safety and comfort. Even when the wind howled outside, it was completely quiet and windless on the floor. You could sit quietly on the floor without fear of cold drafts. The entire structure, from top to bottom, worked as a single unit. The flexible frame dampened gusts of wind, and the secure attachment to the ground prevented it from moving. It was the perfect balance between flexibility and strength. But even the most durable dwelling is useless without the proper organization of the interior space. In the next chapter, you will learn how life inside a teepee helped people survive the harshest frosts. The floor of a teepee was never bare earth. For the inhabitants of the plains, this was as unthinkable as sleeping on bare concrete for us. Creating a warm and dry floor was one of the most important elements of preparing for winter. The entire surface of the ground inside the dwelling was covered with a thick layer of dry grass or branches. This layer created an air cushion that blocked the cold coming from the frozen ground. It was a simple but very effective insulating material. Bison hides were laid on top of this plant substrate. These huge, thick hides with dense fur served as the perfect carpet. They were soft, warm, and durable. The result was a multi-layered floor that provided reliable protection from the cold. It was possible to sit or lie directly on the floor without feeling the cold coming from the ground. This turned the entire interior space into a comfortable living area. Sleeping areas were organized with particular care. Additional layers of fur were laid on top of the common carpet of skins. This created soft and very warm beds. Bison skins were also used as blankets. They were so warm that they allowed you to sleep comfortably, even in the most severe frosts, when the fire in the hearth was almost extinguished. A person found themselves in a cocoon of fur, completely protected from the cold. Comfort was achieved through layering and the use of natural materials. Dry grass, hides, and furs all created a warm and healthy living environment. It was a simple but very effective system of insulation. During the long winter months, especially during blizzards, family life was centered around the central hearth. The interior of the teepee was not just a dwelling, but a small universe living by its own laws. Everyone knew their place and their role. The space inside was clearly divided into zones. The place opposite the entrance was considered the most honorable and was reserved for the head of the family. The rest of the household members sat on either side according to their status. Winter was not a period of idleness. It was a time for crafts and preparation for the coming season. Men repaired weapons, made new arrows, and carved wood. Women processed hides, sewed clothes and moccasins, and embroidered them with patterns. They prepared food, tended the fire, and kept the house tidy. Constant activity filled the house with life. Food was prepared right on the central hearth. It was cooked in cauldrons or roasted over coals. The aromas of the food being prepared mixed with the smell of smoke and created a unique atmosphere of home comfort. In addition to physical work, winter was a time for spiritual life. Long evenings by the fire were devoted to storytelling. The elders passed on the myths, legends, and history of their people to the young. These stories were not just entertainment, they were the main way of teaching, passing on knowledge and moral values. Listening to them, young people absorbed the wisdom of generations. In addition, joint activities in close proximity strengthened family ties. People spent a lot of time together, communicating, working, and relaxing. This created a strong sense of unity and mutual support. Even during the most terrible storms, life inside the Tipi continued as usual. It was filled with work, communication, and tranquility. The hearth warmed not only bodies but also souls, dispelling the darkness and cold of the outside world. Thus, survival was ensured not only by technology, but also by the proper organization of daily life. Orderly and meaningful activity helped to maintain morale and physical strength. It was a victory of order and culture over the chaos of the elements. The Tipis rarely stood alone. They were part of a large winter camp, which was a single social and defensive organism. Survival in harsh conditions was a collective task. The camp was usually set up in a place protected from the wind, such as a river valley or a grove. The choice of location was the first and most important step in determining how comfortable the winter would be. Proximity to water and the availability of fuel supplies were taken into account. The dwellings in the camp were not arranged randomly, but formed a large circle. This layout was not only symbolic, but also deeply practical. The circle provided additional protection from the wind, with the outer tipis sheltering the inner ones. The entrance to each tipi was traditionally facing east. This allowed the first rays of the morning sun to penetrate inside, bringing light and warmth. It also protected the entrance from the prevailing west and north winds. During heavy snowstorms, the entire camp acted as a single entity. If one family ran out of firewood, their neighbors shared their supplies. No one was left alone with their troubles. Strong, young men took responsibility for the safety of the camp. They made sure that no one was buried by snow. If necessary, they cleared paths between the teepees. Thus, strength lay not in individual dwellings, but in their unity. The camp was like a large ship sailing confidently through an icy storm. Social organization and mutual aid were as important to survival as the perfect construction of the teepee. Even the warmest dwelling will not protect you from the cold if you are not dressed and fed properly. The clothing and food of the indigenous peoples were as perfectly adapted to winter conditions as their homes. It was a holistic system of survival. The basis of winter clothing was items sewn from well-processed bison, deer, or moose skins. Leather tanned using animal fat and brains became soft, durable, and waterproof. The fur was often left on the inside for maximum warmth. The principle of layering was well known and actively used. People wore several layers of loose clothing. The air pockets between them served as an excellent insulator, retaining body heat. Particular attention was paid to protecting the feet. Winter moccasins were made tall and sewn from thick leather. Insoles made of dry grass or fur were placed inside, and the moccasins themselves were worn over warm socks made of animal skins. Hands were protected with spacious mittens, and heads with fur hats or hoods. Such clothing completely covered the body, leaving no chance for the cold. It was light, did not restrict movement, and allowed any work to be done in the cold. Nutrition played an equally important role. To withstand the cold, the body had to generate a lot of heat, and this required high-calorie food. The winter diet was rich in fats and proteins. The main winter food was pemmican. This was a concentrate of dried and ground bison meat mixed with melted fat and sometimes dried berries. It was incredibly nutritious and could be stored for years. A small piece of pemmican could sustain a person for many hours. It was the ideal food for harsh conditions, light, compact, and requiring no preparation. It was always kept on hand in case of an emergency. In addition to pemmican, dried and smoked meat was also consumed. Hot soups and stews made from meat with added roots also helped to warm up and restore strength. Drinking plenty of hot herbal teas prevented dehydration. This system, consisting of proper clothing and proper nutrition, allowed a person to generate and retain their own heat. Combined with the ingenious design of the teepee, this provided a complete guarantee of survival in the most extreme conditions. It was a victory of knowledge and foresight over the blind force of nature. We can see that the survival of Native Americans in harsh winter blizzards was not a miracle, but the result of deep knowledge and centuries-old wisdom. The teepee is not just a primitive tent, but a perfect climatic system where each element is well thought out and performs its function. The ingenious shape, double walls, controllable smoke vents, and secure attachment to the ground created an island of safety in the middle of an icy hell. This engineering concept was complemented by the proper organization of daily life, the prudent stockpiling of resources, and the strength of the social community. It was a holistic system in which technology, culture, and a deep understanding of nature were inextricably linked. They did not fight winter but lived in harmony with it, using its own laws for their own benefit. The history of the teepee is an impressive lesson that the most effective solutions are often the simplest and most elegant. It is a reminder that true wealth lies not in the accumulation of things, but in the depth of knowledge about the world in which you live. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the wisdom of ancient peoples.